So, because the gap between my last video and my Halloween video ended up being a bit longer than intended, I had a bit of extra space in my schedule, so I decided to make a quick video to fill the gap, and this is something that's been in my video folder for a little while. Enjoy. I'm a bit of a God of War fan, as you know, a fanatic even, a fanboy even. But with that said, there are details that elude me, or perhaps details that I only noticed after my 10th playthrough. There are people more knowledgeable than me, of course, but I thought it would be fun to take a look at some details that many may have missed in the God of War series, whether they're just overlooked details or things that people have a tendency of missing. So let's take a look, and when it's all said and done, let me know how many of these you already knew. A little something less obscure in this part of the list. I remember a good friend of mine was playing through the God of War series for the first time, and he got to Ascension and asked me what the point of the oath even was, and what was even the purpose of killing Orcos. While this is a retcon for sure, the physical oath that symbolizes the bond between Ares and Kratos had an effect over Kratos. It numbed Kratos to the horrors of what he had done, essentially making him the perfect warrior by suppressing his emotions and his conscience. It was only when the oath was finally broken with the death of Orcos that the full gravity of what Kratos had done became clear to him, and he felt the full wave of emotion from losing his wife and daughter for the first time. This could be seen as the exact moment where his PTSD set in. I understood this pretty well on my first playthrough, but if one person I sometimes respect missed that detail, I figure others may as well. If you're a casual fan of God of War, you may question why the Blades of Chaos showed up in God of War 2018 when they were lost a long time before that game came out. Well, this was a retcon, but it was established that the Blades of Chaos, unlike the other two sets of blades he had throughout the games set in the Greek pantheon, were actually bound to his soul. He initially had the blades gifted to him after he defeated Ares, and he kept them as a trophy. With that said, however, after Greece was destroyed, the blades followed him. So try as he might, he could never actually get rid of them, and so for the rest of his days, they are a forceful, harsh reminder of his time as the Ghost of Sparta. This wasn't properly established until the Fallen God graphic novel series, which established that Kratos tried to throw them into the sea, but the sea itself rejected them. But it was also implied in a random dialogue in Ragnarok.
Why don't you just throw them away? I see the way you look at them sometimes. Like you're... I don't know. Like you hate them.
Even hateful things have their uses. Besides, I tried. They came back.
The result of this was he decided to keep the blades, but vowed never to use them again. Thanks to our knowledge of Spartan culture, we can determine that Kratos is roughly between 26 and 28 years old when he made the pledge to Ares. You see, it's said that Spartan men were basically duty-bound to be in the military until the age of 30, however, they were encouraged to get married and start a family at the age of 20. Looking at Calliope, she looks to be between 6 and 8 years old in the flashbacks, but Kratos is still in the military, so he has to be younger than 30. So we can determine that Kratos married when he was supposed to and is nearing the end of his time in the military, which would also make sense for the fact that he's a high-ranking general, which would definitely take some time to work his way up to. Then there's the amount of time between the initial pledge and the betrayal by Ares. We don't know exactly how long it was, but Calliope didn't seem to have visually aged that much, so it couldn't have been more than 1 year. Plus, he was still active in the military, which means once again, he couldn't have been older than 30. So when Ares betrayed him, Kratos had to have been between 27 and 29 years old. Using this and the 10-year time gap, we can determine that Kratos is roughly between 37 and 39 years old in the original God of War game. Neat. And before anybody asks, some of this info did come from Reddit. So this is a fun one. In God of War Ragnarok, in one of the random dialogues you can encounter, Mimir talks about a tournament that Kratos fought in.
I fought in many contests.
But this particular one, I heard you did battle with beasts, scoundrels, princesses, the undead, automatons, and history's greatest musician. That's not true, is it?
I would not speak of this.
And the thing is, I'm not entirely sure he's referring to PlayStation All-Stars. He mentions beasts, scoundrels, princesses, the undead, automatons, and history's greatest musician. With all of those except for the last, he could be referring to either Mortal Kombat or PlayStation All-Stars. When it comes to beasts, it's a little vague, so he could be referring to multiple characters from Ratchet to Jak and Daxter, but there are plenty of beasts in Mortal Kombat, from Goro to Reptile to Baraka. Scoundrels? Well, in the former camp you have Nathan Drake, but in the latter camp you have the likes of Kano, Quan Chi, or Johnny Cage. Princesses? Well, in the former camp you have Fat, and in the latter you have Kitana. Then for the undead, you have Sir Daniel Fortescue in the former camp, and the likes of Noob Saibot and Scorpion in the latter camp. Automatons? In one case you have Raiden, and in the other case you have Cyrax, Sector, and Cyber Sub-Zero. But yeah, that greatest musician line is pretty unmistakably Parappa the Rapper, unless you want to really stretch credulity and say that it's Sindel who he's referring to, because, let's be honest, Sindel has quite the singing voice given that she can blast your skin off with it. Either way, this does basically confirm a precedent that crossovers are canon, so one being referred to as canon could also set the precedent for the others being included as well. Hell, Kratos was also in Soul Calibur, perhaps it's referring to that. And then we get into a weird multiversal thing where Kratos exists in the same universe that Link from The Legend of Zelda once appeared in. Personally, I actually think that Mortal Kombat has the better position of being considered canon because the canon fits better. Basically being that Shao Kahn summoned the greatest warriors from across the multiverse to assist him in his conquest, but Kratos being one of history's greatest warriors doesn't mean he's a loyal, so immediately he turns on Shao Kahn, inadvertently saving Earthrealm and even earning an allyship with Raiden before being sent home. Meanwhile, with PlayStation Ball Scars, his whole thing is just, I'm about to go conquer Olympus, I need a bit of a warm-up first. So you just happen to find a crossover tournament happening within walking distance, or maybe it involves that time travel. And I think it's a bit too much of an out there concept, but what are you gonna do? It's worth remembering, however, and stick with me here, the developers may have intended this as a reference to PlayStation All-Stars, but only from a non-diegetic perspective, and within universe, the events they could be referring to may be something completely different, but shared some vague characteristics, so that to players it could be interpreted as one thing, while the characters in universe are referring to something else. Prequels are trouble, let's not mince words. It's very easy to inadvertently cause a major issue with the canon if you work backwards. You need to be very careful with timeline placement and specific event layout, lest you accidentally contradict something that was already established in an entry that already exists. And in one of the prequels to the original God of War, that being Chains of Olympus, the game that canonically takes place 5 years before the events of the first game, they inadvertently undermine a lot of the struggle that Kratos goes on in the original God of War game by making killing gods not seem like such a big deal. What do I mean? Well, the entirety of the first God of War game was all about Kratos gaining the power necessary to kill Ares. It was presented as a big deal and potentially a world-changing event, but in the ending to God of War Chains of Olympus, the final boss ends up being Persephone, the goddess of spring and the queen of the underworld. Well, Kratos kills her. Straight, stone-cold kills her. And while the fight is no easy feat, he didn't need any external help or major ancient powers to kill her. He just needed his own power and his wits about him. This is something that a lot of people overlook, and if they don't overlook it, they may overlook the significance. Not only is Ares not the first god that Kratos kills, the first god or goddess that he killed wasn't really that big of a deal comparatively. You could argue that's because Ares is a more major god, and so he would have had a lot more power and therefore would have been a lot harder to kill by default, but that's only something we can infer given that there's no clear establishment. I think this is just a case of them overlooking their own canon while making a prequel, especially considering that this was handled by a different company, this being made by Ready at Dawn instead of the usual Santa Monica Studios. Though results may vary for how much of an embuggerance this is to the overall canon. It's a long-standing running joke that Kratos cannot be killed. He is the man who would not die to the point that even Blaze Bailey looks on him with jealousy. But in actuality, there's more to that than you think. When it comes to points in which Kratos dies, he only decisively dies 3 times. Once in the original 2005 game, once in God of War 2, and once in God of War Ragnarok. There are other instances where he may have been implied to have died. He was thrown off Mount Olympus at the beginning of God of War 3 and fell into the river Styx. He was defeated by Zeus's ethereal form at the end of God of War 3, and he was defeated by Charon and thrown into the pits of Tartarus in Chains of Olympus. But what people may not realize is that in every confirmed case that he died and was brought back, he was brought back with the help of another divine being. In God of War 1, he was helped back to life by Zeus taking the form of the Gravedigger. In God of War 2, Kratos was given the power to be brought back from Gaia, and in God of War Ragnarok, Thor kills Kratos in a contextual moment, but then Thor shocks him back to life out of a sense of not being done with him. The other 3 cases I brought up aren't definitive. If in every case of him being confirmed to have died that doesn't require any interpretation he was brought back with the help of somebody else, that means that Kratos may not actually be as invincible or as unkillable as we may think. He may just be obscenely lucky. However, it's also worth mentioning that there's this whole thing about how in Greek mythology you're not actually really dead until you face the judgment of the 3 kings in the underworld, but that's a whole different can of worms to open. At the beginning of God of War 2018, it's only a short while after Faye's body is burnt that the mysterious stranger shows up, and this is something that many may miss. There seems to be a long-standing implication that Balder assumes that Kratos is actually the guardian of Jotunheim and of the giants. Everything that Balder says in this cutscene where he shows up is carefully crafted to be an unintentional double entendre.
There's no use hiding anymore. I know who you are. Long way from home, aren't you? I thought you'd be bigger. But you're definitely the one. And here I thought your kind was supposed to be so enlightened, so much better than us, so much smarter.
When he says I know who you are, Kratos assumes he's talking about being the ghost of Sparta and a god, whereas Balder is actually referring to an assumption that Kratos is actually a giant. When Balder says he's a long way from home, Kratos assumes he's talking about Greece, whereas Balder is referring to Jotunheim, the land of the giants. So what's up with that? Well, when Faye's body was burnt, the protection spell she put over the valley was lifted. However, we can assume that Kratos laying low for God knows how long, or gods know how long, means that his presence in Scandinavia has never been noticed, meaning that Balder may not know who Kratos is offhand, and so once the presence of a giant was sensed by Odin, he sent Balder out to investigate, and when Balder gets there, he doesn't know the guardian giant is dead, and so the presence he feels is actually Faye's ashes on Kratos' hip. But because he doesn't know the Guardian is dead, but still senses the presence, he assumes that Kratos is the Guardian. This is bolstered by the fact that throughout the entire game, and you can verify this for yourself, Balder never once calls Kratos by his name. Not once, which basically confirms that Balder doesn't know anything about who he's fighting, which means that Balder goes to his grave not knowing that the person he was after is actually just a pile of ashes and he was going after the wrong person. This is especially apparent when Balder refers to Kratos as their kind, however both Balder and Kratos are gods. So Balder is working under the assumption that Kratos isn't a god, he's something different. Though it is worth mentioning that he does imply at one point that perhaps Atreus is the Guardian.
All this time I thought I needed you. But you're just meat. Turns out the boy is the brains.
But that's up for interpretation. Kratos has been a major character in the larger gaming landscape for 2 decades. His backstory and his lore is so well known that we take it for granted. Of course, he is white as ash because his family's ashes were grafted to his skin. Makes sense, that's how it's always been. Which is why it's so often forgotten that Kratos having a ghostly complexion and the reasons why was actually intended as a major plot twist. You see, your first time going through the first game with no outside context, you see flashbacks of Kratos with olive skin. Although I don't know why it's considered olive skin, olives do not have a deep tan color. Yes, I know it's referring to olive oil, shut up, I'm being snide. Anyways, as you're going through the game, you're supposed to be wondering how and why he became so white when he used to be so tan. So that when the reveal happens, it's a major reveal where everything suddenly makes a lot more sense. But because it's only a mystery for the first 3/4 of the first game, and we've now had 8 God of War games, 9 if you count Betrayal, 10 if you count Valhalla, there's way more of the series where it was an established fact than when it wasn't, and so it's something that everybody just kinda takes for granted. But yes, it was supposed to be a big reveal and a plot twist. A fact that has basically been lost to the sands of time. This is a detail that's overlooked quite a bit, even though it's a linchpin for an entire game, but time travel was established and then abandoned in the same game. The Sisters of Fate controlled the flow of time and could freely go back to correct and alter the timeline in a way that is a science fiction nightmare. With that said, despite the fact that this was a major plot point, the entire concept is only a concept for less than an hour of gameplay. You rewind time to fight Zeus, you come back to free the Titans, and the temple is collapsing in on itself, presumably implying the threads of fate itself were unraveling, and so now soon the portals to the past were going to be destroyed, which may explain why we never see time travel again. It's probably not something that many people have forgotten about, but it's probably something that many people overlook. This is a series that just threw in time travel for an hour, and now we never even acknowledge it ever again. Even the games forget about it until an optional dialogue in Ragnarok.
Journeying through time is more trouble than it is worth.
Fair point. You're speaking metaphorically, right?
No.
It's such a matter-of-fact aspect of these games that even when Kratos meets the Norns, the Scandinavian fates, not only do they not have power over time, they don't even have power over fate. They're just really perceptive. Which, yeah, kind of makes the Greek fates a bit ridiculously overpowered. The Blades of Blank is something that every God of War game has, whether it's the Blades of Chaos, the Blades of Exile, or the Blades of Athena. Every game has some form of iconic chain blade that follows the same general design sensibilities, but in actuality, in one game, well, technically 2 games, it's not actually the Blades of Blank, it's the Blank Blades. That being Athena's blades. Yeah, this is something that a lot of people, myself included, often forget. Most people refer to them as the Blades of Athena when they were originally called Athena's Blades. It's a semantic thing, surely if they're Athena's blades, they're also the Blades of Athena, but still, at the end of God of War 1 and in God of War 2, they are in fact referred to as Athena's Blades. However, at the beginning of God of War 3 and in Ghost of Sparta, they're referred to as the Blades of Athena. A slight distinction, but notable for the fact that the common vernacular that people use was the retconned name, not the original name. So it's weird that we're so used to referring to things as the Blades of whatever that almost nobody refers to them by what they were originally referred to as. Even the wiki refers to them by the retconned name and not the original. I'm assuming this was probably some sort of Mandela effect or something. It's just been referred to as something for so long that that's what it is to most people. But now the illusion is broken. Kind of. That right there is the thing that I believe most people have forgotten about God of War. Though to be clear, either name is still valid. Alright, you know the drill. If you like this video, leave a comment telling me what you think, like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. Alright, now how funny would it be if I just kind of ended this video completely abruptly?